Well, an extraordinary trial got underway Wednesday to see if Detroit can proceed with its bankruptcy filing, the largest public filing in U.S. history. Unions, pension funds, and retiree groups are challenging the bankruptcy. At stake is whether the city will be able to restructure its $18 billion of debt and possibly slash pensions for thousands of people. Bill Brandt is president and CEO of Development Specialists Incorporated and a bankruptcy consultant, and has been following this Detroit case. And in fact, he's talked to us about it a number of times. Bill, welcome to Arise America again.
Thank you, Debbie. It's good to be here.
Well, let's start with some basics here. So Detroit is filing for Chapter 9 protection.
Correct.
Under the bankruptcy law. How difficult is it to prove eligibility, and where is Detroit on that spectrum?
One of the wonderfully ironic things about bankruptcy is if you are a corporate debtor and you file a Chapter 11, people assume that you are bankrupt, and the court lets you get what is called an order for relief almost immediately, because people think, who in their right mind would file bankruptcy unless you wanted to be? It's the inverse for municipalities. You actually have to prove you're broke. And for most municipalities, proving you're broke requires a trial and usually takes 6 to 8 months. Detroit is on a very fast track because the judge has put it there. Having said that, Debbie, there's no certainty that they'll be able to prove they're broke, as bizarre as that sounds.
It does sound bizarre. In fact, one of the attorneys in favor of the bankruptcy said that this is one of those cases where the data speaks very clearly and persuasively on its own. It needs no gloss. Why are you smiling about that? What's your reaction to that?
You know, you could prove any city in America. You could prove New York was bankrupt if you analyzed the balance sheet and said, do you have enough assets to cover your expected outflow if you count the pension liabilities? No. The issue isn't going to be whether there's a solvency or insolvent test for Detroit alone. The issue is also good faith, which is the second part of the finding the judge has to find. Good faith is interesting, Debbie. You know, the state legislature in Michigan could decide, in their largesse, that they'd pass a tax that would bail out Detroit. That would solve the good faith problem right off the bat. But, you know, the good legislatures in Michigan have chosen to let Detroit kind of hang in the wind, haven't they?
They have indeed. And, of course, many of the parties that are challenging this bankruptcy filing, as we said in the introduction, are those who are members of pension funds as well as retirees. And so their stake in this is they're afraid that they will lose those funds if granted this protection.
A well-grounded fear.
It is a well-grounded fear. But let me ask you this. Are they cutting off their nose to spite their face? Because if Detroit indeed becomes completely insolvent and has no money, then where's the money going to come from to pay those funds anyway?
Well, cities never have no money. At some point, there is a tax base and there is ways to raise revenue. You know, people forget about the fact, everybody comes to me and always says, aren't these pensioners, don't they have a great deal? They're living the high life, high on the hog. Why shouldn't we cut these employee pensions? People forget that government employees don't participate in Social Security. They all have this mindset that if you cut their pensions, they're just going to drop back onto Social Security. They don't participate in Social Security. You cut their pensions, there is no safety net. It is what they bargained for. If you change it, that's all they get. They don't get to show up at the Social Security office and say, okay, I'd like to try this for a change. So what I'm seeing is a number of these Chapter 9s pointed right at what I would call organized public employee unions. It is much more a political battle than is an economic one. It is not for nothing that Governor Schneider and the Republican establishment wants to go after the unions, and it's frankly what you see around the country. The bondholders are not being pressed as much as the unions, and in that sense what you're seeing is the politics are basically after the pensions and the unions.
Well, what if, let's do a little bit of what if. So what if the judge does not decide to approve this bankruptcy? Then what happens? Where does that leave Detroit?
Does the world come to an end? No. What happens is Detroit is not found to be bankrupt, and we go back to the same negotiations we've had in the state legislature with the federal government. How can we do this? You know, Detroit had Hurricane Katrina happen to it just over a span of years. We bailed out New Orleans, but yet we're happy to let Detroit just sit and twist in the wind, which is a major manufacturing area for this country. At some point, I'm not suggesting we write checks, but you could get in and civic-minded leaders could get in and talk about this. One of the last things I want to say to you, Debbie, is everybody talks about this with respect to pensions and bonds. There's a saying in the bankruptcy business, you can't cut your way to profitability. So all of these people take pension cuts and they all wind up being dirt poor with no Social Security. what's the future of Detroit? Nobody has painted for me a picture that says, I'm going to take a city that's 83% African American in a state that's 80% white, and you can kind of figure out what's going on, and I'm going to paint for you the future. Here's what we are to become, and here's how we are going to get there. Nobody's saying that. What they're saying is, all of you can eat dog food, and we'll find a way out of this if you do that. That, to me, isn't a scenario for success.
They should call you.
Well, they have called me, but I'm a Democrat, Debbie.
All right. Bill Brandt, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you again.